Welcome to Mining Indaba 2025. My name's Ian Sanders. I'm our Global Mining and Metals Sector Leader here at Deloitte. And I'm here today with Zama Dlamini and Louis Kruger to talk to you about Tracking the Trends, our 17th edition of our signature publication that talks around 10 trends that we're seeing globally, and we'll reference them in this conversation to here in the African continent around how mining will impact on the broader global economy. We're here today in beautiful Cape Town, and we're going to talk to you about what we're seeing as the key trends within the mining and metals sector industry. So our first trend is we'll actually look at what's happening geopolitically. Instability, big energy transition, urban population growth, a whole lot of factors that are actually leaning down and impacting significantly on our industry. It's interesting when you look at global GDP that sits there at roughly $110 trillion. If we look at the market cap of our mining and metals company clients, that sits at about $2 trillion, a very small percentage of the global GDP. But the importance of our sector is much more than that small percentage. We are absolutely integral to everything that we do, and we're going to explore some of that today. And I'm here today with my colleagues Zama and Louis, and we'll chat openly about some of the key issues and what we're seeing within the broader sector, particularly in reference to Africa, but we'll relate it to some examples elsewhere to bring other instances in to showcase some of what's going on globally. So, with that in mind, globally, what are we really experiencing? Well, there's a number of wars, there's a lot of government changes, and of course, there's a big focus and an interesting twist around the focus on energy transition and what does that mean. From an African context, it's really interesting. You know, Africa, very rich in mineral resources, but are you actually getting the true benefit? Are you realising the true benefit from those resources, from the mining activity? Is there enough processing happening within the broader continent? Are you different to other economies and countries? Can be a very interesting perspective. And I think we'll explore a little bit of that. If you take another example around Brazil, Brazil has about 20% of global mining critical minerals, but they're only actually producing 1% at the moment, and they're refining a lot less. So they have very similar challenges to what we've got here in Africa, and that's also in other countries. Another key aspect that we'll face into is just how much of the broader resources and reserves we understand, and what a great opportunity that can actually bring to bear. So Louis, from an African perspective, what are you seeing as sort of playing out with the global geopolitical foundations that we're looking at, and how does that actually relate to our clients and the economy?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think there's been a lot of conversation, I think, at the Indaba specifically around energy transition and the race for critical minerals. And what we're seeing is both East and West are looking for these minerals, and it's going to be critical for the energy transition. And then, as you mentioned, I think the big focus is from an Africa perspective is how does Africa benefit and how does the nations benefit in Africa of this transition. There's a lot of talk around how do we facilitate downstream beneficiation. And there are certain things, you know, currently I think most of the exploration budgets are focused towards copper and gold. While I think 30% of critical minerals are situated in Africa, the infrastructure required to develop those still needs to be developed in many cases.
Zama, what are you seeing around some of the challenges that our clients are facing into?
We've alluded to some of the challenges at a global level. As Africa, we're also not immune from such challenges. We've got several complex challenges coming from all directions. Energy transition has been mentioned. You've got logistical and supply chain issues, health and safety. You've got infrastructure deficits. The list goes on. But let me focus on key ones, especially affecting South Africa from an infrastructure perspective, which then brings in the logistics in terms of moving the cargo. So it hinders the availability and the moving of the cargo. in terms of the materials, the products, and the equipment that is needed for mining. That causes delays. It increases the costs. So what then becomes important is the infrastructure development. And what we're seeing most mining houses do, they are partnering with government to solve for this issue around the whole value chain. And I think that's the right way to go, to make sure that we can get our goods, we can mine, we can process, we can do whatever, but it's of no use if we can't move the product to the final destination. And I've also seen most of the mining houses again investing a lot in technologies just to make sure that the process is more efficient in moving that cargo. But I think another challenge that we see is around the environmental, social, and climate change pressures. Again, as much as the other industries are faced with this challenge, I think there's more scrutiny or focus on the mining industry given how much global gas emissions we produce. And therefore, puts us under pressure as the mining industry to decarbonize our operations. And practically at the ground, I think we've seen a lot of participation programs with the communities as well, in trying to solve for the problem, solve for the conflicts that we see in the mining regions, and making sure that we have got a collaborative solution that will serve for the greater society, and not only just the mining houses, but also for the rest of the communities where we mine, which I think is critical. Lastly, linked or not, I see a lot of strategies in terms of the mining houses diversifying their minerals, especially those that are operating with coal in the main. So it's not only to reduce the carbon emissions, but also to make sure that their business is viable going forward. So you see a lot of strategies having that component. We need to diversify, add more minerals into our portfolio to make sure that the company lives longer.
And just there, Zama, what's happening is you're getting a number of core mining companies globally who are just specialising in coal.
Yep.
So, which is interesting, and they do it most efficiently and effectively, which is, again, good. And that's part of that portfolio allocation that is absolutely critical.
Very true.
You were mentioning there around ESG and the importance of it. It is really, really critical, I think, from a leadership perspective to show good ESG principles, purpose and goals. We've seen that come off just a little bit in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and the discussion around, is it 30% by 2030 and net zero by 2050? But where are we sort of seeing good leadership in your mind within our mining clients that is continuing to focus and stress ESG and the importance of ESG within the broader fabric of the business and the fabric of the ecosystem?
I think it has moved to a space where it becomes part of the culture, right? And not just as an add-on. And there's a lot of good that the mining houses are really doing in the communities where they mine. But it is often not sustainable long after the mine closures. So we see then a need to be innovative and more creative in solving for this issue. Even if it's beyond just mining, just making sure that you allow for sustainable development conditions that would allow to go even in other sectors. Not even developing skills only for mining, but opening it broadly so that the communities are able to benefit from that. But also, I think with the targets that have been set, others 2030, others 2050, I think it also puts a lot of pressure on the mining houses to make sure that their activity is moving at speed. But with the coal houses, that's yet to be seen because they need to reduce and diversify the portfolio, right? To make sure that they reduce the carbon emissions, but also the life of the mine as well.
And very, very important that those coal companies keep operating for sustainable jobs and so on and so forth. But they are focusing on new technology and what they can do to improve that broader footprint.
Yeah.
And really, really interesting that you were talking about that sort of, fabric within organisations and how important it is for ESG.
Maybe if I can add to that, I think that the whole ESG component, specifically the S part of ESG, has become centered to the strategy of many of the organizations. And I think mining has the opportunity to really make a big impact in the communities that they operate. And we've come a very long way. Of course, there's always more that can be done. And I think that there's lessons to be learned from oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia and the likes in terms of what they are doing. And perhaps that is something that we can look to into the future to see how we can help some of these primary sector countries diversify and leave an industry behind when mining closes, because it's a finite resource.
Yeah. And, you both touched on their collaboration being just so important when it comes to ESG. Time and time again, organisations understand that they can't go alone. Or if they do go alone, it's going to take so much more time and so much more effort. And that by pooling resources and broader resources and coming together, we end up with good outcomes, or we end up with good learnings and opportunities to base that from. Burge Bulk and BHP. So Burge operate out of Singapore, are collaborating on a pilot iron ore voyage, and did so from Australia to China, powered by biodiesel, as an example. So there's something that's innovative and thoughtful in and around how can we actually improve that footprint. Well, it takes collaboration.
I think the key for me there is when you start is how do you make sure that you really do understand the need of the communities, that we don't just build a school because we are good at building schools, but that the community needs a training center or a water reservoir or whatever the real need is in order to make an impact.
Yeah, I like that, because that's where you often find the misaligned expectations and responsibilities from a government perspective and the mines, where the government, local communities will fold their hands and push everything to the mine. However, with a collaborative approach, really understanding the needs of the community and what we can do, that is the solution. Because I think in the main, the historic approach has really been the mines to provide services and infrastructure, clinics, schools, hospitals, whatever it is. But I think we need to be disruptive in the sense that we build infrastructure, not only fit for mining, right? That can be open to other sectors like tourism, agriculture, whatever it is. So have those conditions enabled so that the communities, long after the mine is closed, are able to venture into other sectors as well and into other businesses over and above what is mining specific.
I hear a lot about, Simandou and how that sort of collaborative effort has come together. Maybe, Louis, you can explore that a little bit about as a great example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Africa is really rich and the endowment is amazing. And I think Africa is also still underexplored. Maybe there's much more. There should be much more. But the thing is, like I said, if you focus just on precious metals, when we start looking at some of the bulk commodities and critical materials and those sort of things, a lot of infrastructure is going to be needed. And if you look at the Simandou project in Guinea, it's massive, and it's also required public-private partnership consortiums in order to develop that. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, and it's going to be needed, whether it's regional collaboration between governments, whether it is private sector and public sector coming together to build this infrastructure and enable us to open up these regions to develop these resources. I think that is going to be key for the development of Africa's wealth.
Yeah, fantastic. So in and amongst that development, of course, we've got to find funds, the finances and so forth. That's obviously got to be attractive for banks and other big institutions. Some of the major mining companies have got better access to that, but at the next layer, it's tough, it's difficult. How can Africa as a continent face into some of those challenges, because the available dollars can be short?
I think, again, and this is also a conversation around downstream beneficiation, manufacturing, and all of those sort of things. We're competing with global value chains. So first of all, if you look at mining investment, it is long-term investments. It's capital intensive. There's already a lot of risk, geological risk, cost factor inputs, or all those sort of things. So I think what is critical is to create a stable regulatory environment so that there's certainty for mining companies that enables them to make long-term decisions. And we don't change the rules of the road all the time. So I think that is critical. Zero tolerance to corruption. I think that's the second thing. There's been a lot of talk around efficient permitting systems and transparency in the permitting process. Also, yesterday we had our panel on exploration in Africa. One of the big things that came out of that is access to geological data and transparency of that. And then lastly, there is going to need to be a big effort on the infrastructure side, so we can open up some of these corridors to enable the exploitation and making these big resources viable.
But there's been discussion in the last couple of days from many of the economies in Africa around making the information available around exploration to all. which is absolutely fantastic. And certain governments have invested really well in that, such that, then everyone has access to good information, intelligence and data that they can use and leverage within the organisation. That's a differentiating factor, when you think about the rest of the globe.
And we've heard the examples of Botswana and Namibia. We're really looking forward to see what's going to happen in South Africa with the cadastral system that's being implemented. And I think Kenya just went through a big mapping exercise as well. It's starting to happen, and I think that's very positive.
Yeah, very positive. Yeah.
To the point that Louis is making, if one looks at the geopolitics and the trade wars that are happening, talking to the funding as well, with changes in regulatory, with changes in leadership, changes in government, that threatens the viability of the business. The commodity prices, are affected. The share prices are affected. So it is important, imperative actually for us to make sure that the regulatory environment is strong enough to allow for all of the other activities that need to happen. Because with those changes up and down happening, it destabilizes the operations and affects the share price.
Let's pivot a little bit in and around some of the trends. And, we all know that transformation can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But in order to create change, we need to really create changes in the ways of working, the habits that we undertake. And of course, we're not going to create transformational change unless we've got technology enabled and people at the heart of everything that we're going to do. So when we think about technology, there's been a lot of conversation over the last couple of days around AI in particular. Automation, not too many people are talking about automation. That's just sort of table stakes now. It's all around AI and how you can leverage and use the information and intelligence and data. And leadership here is, I think, really, really important. How can you lead from the front? How can you show others what good looks like? Zama, what are you seeing from a technology perspective around what good looks like? And how are companies actually, facing into all of the available data, the different technology, the innovation streams? There's a cascade of information and intelligence that are coming at them. How are they actually synthesizing and using it?
Sure. I've got a good example of that one. There is a tool that we implemented in one of our clients, Edge Mining, which is powered by one of our alliance partners. So this technology really tries to transform the mining operations by enhancing safety and security, as well as optimizing on the efficiency. And this is done through real-time data, 24/7, all right? With this technology, you can actually see unsafe behavior that's happening underground, real-time. And you can also see any hazards around the mine. What that does, it allows for immediate response. How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
And with this, you are building all of this information and you're creating trends as well. And it uses some of the existing equipment, the sensors, the cameras that are deployed in places where it's difficult. Otherwise, if there was an incident underground, it would probably take a couple of days. But here, it's real time. You see what is happening and you are able to avoid that. And that contributes to your health and safety. So there is a couple of technologies we have implemented, but I see most mining houses are really biting into investing in advanced technologies because the status quo needs to change. And they can see how you need to optimize your operations through technology. It is expensive, but I think they understand the investment long term in enabling their operations as well.
And the other thing with data is, every time you put in new equipment with all of the sensors and information that's coming with that equipment, you've got to be equipped for it.
Yep.
So in essence, leadership can be shown through data governance.
Yes.
What is the framing that you've got for your data and the available data? How do you use it? How do you control it? How do you make sure that it keeps valid and up to date? How do you twin it in with all of your equipment and processes and other technology that's available elsewhere? How do you look at technology from around the globe, what your competition's doing, work with your suppliers and so forth? To bring it all together, I think can be a really, really important aspect.
Yes. And I think it talks to the skills of the future because we would not have thought about it now, right? So to your leadership, leading from the front, because it means people working in there need to have different sets of skills, right? From a transformative perspective, that means you need to invest in your people as well to make sure that they catch up with where the technology goes.
We were talking yesterday, Louis, in and around budgeting, planning, forecasting, the whole sort of planning process. that dovetails into reporting as well, and we'll come back to skills. But, in and around that forecasting and reporting, the use of data is really, really important. And the time and effort that can be wasted in actually just getting the right information to the right users, and the lack of real time that you were referring to before, Zama, is a real inhibitor for effective productivity within organisations.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think that technology is here, but there's going to be a couple of keys to success. I think it is more and more that we're seeing it's going to be ecosystem, and how do you integrate all of these solutions. I think a lot of mining companies, through digitalization, digital operations, the tech that's available, there's been some disappointment in terms of the benefits out of all of these things. And I think there are two things for me that's quite important. How does all of this tech form part of the overall technology roadmap and strategy? And does it add to or does it detract from what we want to achieve? In some instances, what I've seen is that there's just been too much. And the worker that actually needs to consume all of this information and technology gets overwhelmed. That brings me to the second point, which I think is really around the change management and the adoption. If you look at mining, it's all around unit cost, and this is a big opportunity to bring unit cost down. How can we reduce waste? How are we more efficient? But it needs to be part of a overall technology roadmap strategy, and it needs to have a benefits case when you implement and deploy. And it's important that one close that loop and see what is the real benefits realization of these investments.
That's really interesting you talk about that, Louis. I've had conversations with 5 or 6 different organisations in the last 12 months that are really revolutionising the way they're looking at their digital or technology strategy. And it's not rocket science, but it's actually really important to change the way that they're actually going about that execution of strategy. And in each of those organisations, ultimately, they're coming back to, like you were saying, how are we working into the operations and the assets of the business? How are we understanding the key issues that they're facing, that the employees are facing, and working with them to have technology enable, along with people, solutions. And you can't be everything to everyone. So those that are going to lead from the front and take real advantage are making strategic choices around the areas that they're going to go after. Because you're not going to eliminate every problem. How can we aggregate or theme the issues that we're going to go after? Is it maintenance? Is it pit to port, or whatever that might be? And what are the areas that we're really going to face into and invest in significantly to work with the operations through technology and change to get to those outcomes, so we get the productivity improvement that is ultimately needed. So if we come back to talent, that's one of our trends. Our talents are always looking, of course, into the purpose of the organisation. They're looking at the skills that they're going to need, not only today, tomorrow, but in 3 to 5 years' time. We've got generative AI in and amongst everything that we're facing into. How are we going to be able to reskill, repurpose, look at the whole talent within organisations over the next 2 to 3 years?
I think, again, I like this point that I made earlier around creating sustainable conditions that will allow for different things to happen just beyond mining. So we need to be able to create an environment where people are able to grow their skills. Maybe let me take it back to the local communities, because remember, the mining houses, they already support students there, from bursaries to educational assistance and all of that. So that's the start of it, right? So you already have raw talent that you have from the base level. And again, you are giving back in terms of from an ESG perspective and pulling it through to the educational institutions, all right? Through the collaboration to make sure that the talent that comes out is fit for the future, right? And I think that point is critical for me, because we can't wait until they graduate and then we realize that their skills are actually, it's not what we need. So we need to influence that as mining houses early on through collaboration, again, with the educational institutions. So if you look at it from communities down to the educational institutions, and again, through the industry associations, because we need to work together. I don't think any one mining company can, well, I guess they can, but it will be better if we collaborate as industries. But critical to all of this, we need to know what are those skills that we'll need in the future so that we can influence it now.
That's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Zama and Louis. We could talk for another hour, I'm sure, but the trends will continue to evolve. We certainly look forward to continued discussion during 2025. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deloitte Green Dot Conversations. For more, please visit www.deloitte.co.za.